Mr. Withers, how are you today?
Good, good. How are you, Tim, and everybody
Excellent.
else?
Excellent. We can hear you pretty well on the volume. Everybody can hear Bud okay or good.
Yep.
All
Good.
right. We have a couple of latecomers, so we'll hang on here for a little bit longer
Sure.
and
Sounds good. How's the weather down on the coast?
lovely,
Is
lovely.
it?
I think it's probably close to 60 or between 55 and 60
Cool.
Where
and
do you live, Tim, that it's close to 60? Wait a minute.
well, my house, I mean, yeah.
No, it probably is because it's in the low 50s here.
Oh,
So
okay.
it'll be warmer where you are.
Yeah.
Well, I've got 46 degrees where I am. I live outside Seattle.
Ah, yeah. Whereabouts, east side or?
Yeah, yeah. We live in Woodinville. Are you familiar with
Uh-huh.
that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, about 20 miles northeast of Seattle.
Okay. Okay.
It used to be the far distant, you wouldn't even call it a suburb. We've been here 30 years, and
Hmm.
uh, it was, it was almost rural then, and
Sure.
now it's just kind of in the middle of the suburbs, basically.
Yeah. I have a daughter. My younger daughter lives, I forget the name of the neighborhood. But in Seattle, I guess South Seattle, around Boeing Field.
Oh, okay.
But she teaches in Bellevue.
Okay.
And yeah.
So it's probably Georgetown neighborhood.
It is
something?
Georgetown. Thank you.
Georgetown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's on the uphill side of Georgetown.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a cool neighborhood.
Yeah, kind of bohemian, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get used to the aircraft pretty quickly when we're visiting, shaking the house and all that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the eerie part of 9/11 was the days after, especially if I was out on a bicycle ride that took me closer to Logan Airport, was the silence. The fact
yeah.
that there was no noise.
Yeah.
It was really startling and, really tough to deal with, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That nothing in the sky.
Yeah. Carl, have you heard, or have any of you heard about the, it's been a few years now, the musical Come From Away? It's been on Broadway for about four or 5 years now. Basically, it's the story of the diverted airlines that landed in Ganders, Nova Scotia, which in itself, was a town of 5,000 or 6,000, and in one day, 10,000 new people landed in Ganders and so it's a musical about the whole story of how the town pulled together and fed the people and it's a great story.
Haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. So, all right.
Yeah,
Well,
it was, I left my office after the planes hit. We had a TV on. And for some reason, I made the choice of going across a bridge rather than through a tunnel to get home.
Yeah.
And halfway across that bridge, I started to think, gee, was this the smart thing to do?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they were just leaving Boston, not coming to it.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll enter a few other members as they report. So welcome everyone to our December 9th regular meeting of the Gold Beach Rotary Club. And we'll go ahead and start with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, we're going to bring Jerry in here. Our thought for the day. comes from one of my favorite presidents because he and I share the same birthday, Harry S. Truman. And he has quote for the day is, "If you can't convince them, confuse them." So with that thought, the floor is open to share any. I've put the agenda up on the screen there. You can see we'll have some happy thoughts, some announcements from yesterday's meeting, and then we'll introduce Bud. Bud, do you have flexible time, or do you need to move to the top
No,
of the agenda?
I've got as much time as you need.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So this is time for happy thoughts or announcements.
Well, just to update the club on what's happening at the Homeless Coalition. They have a bus from Curry Transit that's being outfitted to be a portable office. Sometime next week, the building on Coven Street will be closed. The washer and dryer that Rotary paid for with help from Doogie is under a memorandum of agreement with Christian Help and will remain available for Beth and the people helping the homeless to use to clean clothing and sleeping bags and the like. They are in conversation with the senior center about providing noontime meals. They provide maybe 10 bag lunches to people in addition to, you know, when I'm there doing shower duty at 10 o'clock in the morning, people drop in and get a bagel and a cup of hot coffee. The open discussion item is what will happen with showers. Will we be able to provide showers somewhere within Gold Beach? The good news is one of our very young female clients showed up yesterday. Happy as can be. She was 34 days sober.
Awesome.
Which is good to see.
Hey, Carl, if in fact Beth is able to get some sort of permanent location, will she be able to take the washer and dryer?
If that were to happen, she could. Yes, the
Okay.
memorandum of agreement clearly acknowledges, Christian Help clearly acknowledges it's owned by the Homeless Coalition from Rotary. Because of its location in the building, there was a little bit of discussion about access to it for a while, but that has been resolved and it is working out very well.
Okay, good.
People are, until we close, and the county is taking the building back, and Beth hopes, is planning on closing the doors there in advance of December 31st, but the bus is ready. Still looking at a building in town. Don't have the money for it. Don't know if the zoning would work, but the program continues. The regulars are still around.
Mhm.
Some of them, one of the guys I see periodically used to live up at the mill site up towards Agnes. Well, he's been evicted, if you will. They're clearing the brush that he lived in because a new owner is turning that into an RV park, apparently.
That's what I hear.
But, you see most of the regulars that aren't in jail. They're still floating around. Some are doing very well and some aren't doing very well at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Carl. I appreciate that update. Jeremy, you yesterday during our board meeting alluded to an announcement you might make today, but since the people who were at the board meeting are also present today, for the record, did you want to remind people about I think it was the book study?
Well, there's two programs that may be of interest to people. The first one is they're both virtual programs. One is tomorrow at 5:30, which is the Museum of Bad Art um, out of Boston. They're doing a virtual program talking about bad art.
Yep, I have my
Um,
tickets.
so if you're interested, you can go to the library website and request a Zoom invitation for that. And then the other one that I was particularly surprised by how much I was impressed by it was one that Brody Carpenter put together, which is a a book club. And so he picked a book that he wanted to make available to the public for reading, and we have multiple copies of it available. But it's called Designology, and it is a book about that really focuses on the different ways that people perceive space around them based on their personalities and other characteristics, and how you can design spaces within your home to be compatible with those characteristics. And it's a pretty quick read. I read through it, and I've gone through the Myers-Briggs workshops and other things like that, and they're interesting, but this one I was surprised at even the minutia about how accurate it was in terms of my own personal preferences for spaces, and my wife's. So, for example, since COVID, she's been doing a lot of work at home. She's a teacher, and so she's all spring she was on her computer, on her laptop, doing online school stuff, and she was developing pretty serious neck problems because of being hunched over on the computer. And in this book, it says for people of her personality type, you need to be really careful to make sure that you've got an extremely comfortable work chair and desk space, maybe a stand-up desk, because basically you're the type of person that doesn't realize how long you're sitting at your computer, and you're also highly distracted by pain. So pretty surprised at how good that was. And I was just thinking that for anybody who, for a variety of reasons, I think it's a really compelling program. So if you're interested, there's going to be an introductory session kind of to talk about the book that Brody will be leading, but there's plenty of time to read the book, check out the book at the library or buy your own copy, and then participate in an online discussion.
Great. Is that a one-time session, or is it meant to you read along and stay?
It's going to just be a one-time thing.
Okay.
So the introduction will be a one-time thing, and then I'm not sure. I'll have to pull up the schedule, but I believe it's not going to be until January that he'll do the one-time book discussion.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just as a quick summary of our board meeting yesterday, we decided that because of our restrictions, we would go ahead and have our bottle auction be a virtual event, and with the idea that people generally have an amount that they donate or plan to donate donate every year. So we'd ask that you continue in that process for this season by dropping off your check or cash, or if you want to use a card, Becky can help do that at the bank. And appreciate your consideration for that. Secondly, the board decided that we would apply for the District 5110's literacy grant, with the goal that we would provide gift certificates for Riley Creek Elementary students so that they could go to a virtual book fair and purchase books that they would have in their home. And Jeremy is going to kind of help with some of those arrangements with Riley Creek. And then finally, we have, I believe, 4 non-active members who our final report to Rotary International is due at the end of the month, and we want to make sure it's accurate so we're not billed for them. So Denise has given final notice to those people. If they don't reply by December 28th, then they will be dropped from our rolls.
You know what I just thought of after talking to Becky yesterday is we need to let her know so that she can start keeping her whichever credit card thing she uses
Uh-huh.
at the bank, because she doesn't always have it with her. I'd asked her
Yeah.
specifically if people could pay their dues
Uh-huh.
by credit card. And she said it's not worth it to do it for a one-time thing, for
Right,
one person
right,
because of the cost, but also it's usually at home. So we
Right.
need help, you know, one of us just has to remind her to bring it.
yeah, yeah. Yesterday I had a photo op with Mary to receive the donation for the High on Health program. And so when I drop that off, I'll get a chance to talk with Becky about that as well. Excuse me, I've had a knock at my door. I just need to remind people I'm in a meeting. Oh, there you are. Speaking of which,
There's one.
there's one. I'm in a Rotary meeting.
I know you're.
Yeah. Go ahead, go
So
ahead.
late today.
We're good.
Password admin, or the
Yeah.
login admin, password is password 2020.
Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
The other one,
No?
I wouldn't give you, it says too old.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll try to get the end of the meeting here.
All right, if not, it's recorded.
Okay.
See ya, thanks. You didn't recognize that was Brian.
Was she dropping off laptops?
He was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Is Mary still on?
She is.
Because one of the things I'm thinking is that we need to get that out, and and I think we said it was going to go, you were going to write it and send it to Mary to put on Facebook on the
Bottle auction.
laptops.
Oh, the laptops. I thought we were talking about the bottle auction.
Well, that too, but how do we get out the notice for the laptops?
Yeah, same thing. We could do that.
It looks like Tim poked his head back out the door. I think that there was some, Denise was
Yes.
asking about the laptops and the criteria, how we could advertise that to the membership or the community at large.
Right.
And I can't remember who was Brian, or were you going to talk to Dan about?
I was going to talk to Dan, our district IT person, about what the boundaries, if you will, as far as age and operating systems and such, to make it a worthy donation, a usable donation, I should say. So, yeah, I will do that. Last call for any announcements or other club business. Otherwise, we'll move on to our guest speaker. And I'm going to stop sharing screen here in a second. You'll notice that in the agenda that I'll send out after the meeting, there's some hot links, or just links. They could be cold too, I suppose, that Bud will refer to in his chat. So Bud reached out to me a couple weeks ago and offered to speak with us today. His very brief bio is he's been a long-time sports writer in the Northwest, including 17 years with the Register Guard. He is the author of Mad Hoops, a book chronicling the chaotic and controversial reign of the Kamikaze Kids. Yesterday I called them the Century Kids. The Kamikaze Kids and Coach Dick Harder at the U of O. My memories of the 70s, Bud, if you see our membership has a wide range of ages, but as a high school student in the mid 70s, I grew up in Stockton. So my big following, of course, was the University of the Pacific and some of their glory days about that same time. But I also have a vivid memory of going to a high school game in which this young 7-foot guy named Bill Cartwright at Elk Grove High School came down to Stockton, and they packed to the Civic Auditorium, and the local team actually beat Bill Cartwright. But anyway, as a high school kid, I was definitely a basketball gym rat and would gobble up. So at least personally, I am really looking forward to hearing about your experiences as a reporter and the whole process of self-publishing your book. So with that, I'll go ahead and formally introduce Bud Withers.
Thanks, Tim. We really set this up kind of on the fly pretty quickly, and I appreciate your being nimble about it. I guess that's sort of the watchword during the pandemic, but it occurred to me also that for as miserable as the pandemic has made all of us in varying degrees, that at least there's a speck of good that comes out of it with meetings like this, because it would be difficult for me to get down to Gold Beach, to appear in person. So this is certainly a fine consolation prize, being able to do it via Zoom. So there is that, at least. So to give you just a smidge more background on myself before we launch into this, I did work in Eugene for 17 years, and I was during the time period of the kamikaze kids at Oregon in the 70s. I was actually the beat writer on Oregon State basketball, which was interesting. Some of you may remember Ralph Miller, who was the legendary, actually future Hall of Fame basketball coach at Oregon State, and I covered him for a number of years. And but being in Eugene, obviously I had what I would call a front row seat to all the proceedings at the U of O under Dick Harder. So anyway, in brief, after my years in Eugene, I came up to Seattle in the late 80s and worked at both Seattle papers for a good bit of time, actually about 28 years. And then I retired in 2015 from the Seattle Times, but I still wanted to write. And so I sort of veered off into self-publishing books. And it's been a really fulfilling pursuit, I guess you would say. This is my second self-published book, and this is what the Oregon book looks like. Mad Hoops is what I called it. I don't know. Are any of you familiar with that era at Oregon, or I need to kind of get a foundation as to what you might know and what you may not know. Anybody was around then? Or, okay.
Well, I know Denise, Carl, and Mary are all East Coasters. So, and Jeremy wasn't born yet.
Okay.
Jerry, I know, has got pretty strong allegiance to the Beavers. So,
okay.
But yeah, please go ahead and fill us in.
Yeah. Well, I'm fully prepared to give you a sort of a baseline of what it was all about. Probably the best way to think of this particular reign, which was 7 years, 1971 to 78, is that most of you probably have heard of Bob Knight at the University of Indiana, and just kind of what a wacko he was. I tend to think of Dick Harder's time at Oregon as sort of very similar to Bob Knight, but without the trophies. Harder certainly never won a national championship as Knight did. He never won a Pac-8 championship. It was the Pac-8 back in those days. Of course, he had to go up against John Wooden at UCLA, so that was a pretty formidable challenge, and it would probably be unrealistic to think that he could knock Wooden off for a conference championship. But he was in terms of his personality, he was similar. He was known for being a very mercurial figure. Did a lot of bizarre things on and off the court. He to kind of take a step backward, he believed in as much as Bob Knight did, he believed in a very rugged defense. His system was very defense oriented. He wanted his players to dive on the floor for loose balls. It was man-to-man defense almost exclusively. I doubt that they ever played a possession of zone during his 7 years, but it was very grabby and physical and tons of fouls in the game. I was even knowing the era pretty intimately. I was in going back and doing the research for the book. I was blown away by some of the foul totals. I cite an example in the book. One of his years, they committed, and I can't tell you what year it was offhand, they committed 800 plus fouls in what was it, the year, I believe it was the statistic I quoted, the year previous to him getting there, they had committed like 450. It was just this crazy rise. And that number of fouls, by the way, still holds as the Oregon, I mean, here we are 45 years later, still holds as the Oregon school record. But it was extremely rugged, and they were known for doing things like in practice, they would station a player on each side of the key and roll the ball through the key, and the players would have to compete for the ball. They would have to dive on the ball, and of course you'd have collisions and blood and bruises, and they had a drill in which a player would have to, there would be a line of players facing a single player, and the single player would have to take a charge from the front of the line, get back up, take a charge from the next guy, and just repeat it, just physical punishment. It was just extreme. And then in the later years of Harder's regime, about halfway, which would be 1975 or 6, he came upon the idea of, when they did defensive slides, which you may be familiar with, it's just the action of a defensive player sliding laterally to mirror the offensive player, with your hands outstretched. He came upon the idea of, gee, wouldn't it be great training to require the players to hold a brick, a masonry brick in each hand, and so they would go for minutes on end, going back and forth, like a half an hour, going back and forth and doing these slides with these bricks in their hands. And they would require them to maybe they'd raise the right hand with this brick and lower the left one, and vice versa. And there were just all manner of these things. And then another thing he did late in his tenure, at about the same time as the bricks, was the ropes. I don't know where I kind of do know where he got this, but anyway, he had a couple of ropes affixed to the catwalk up in MacArthur Court, the old arena in Eugene, and toward the end of practice, players would have to shinny up this rope. It might be, I don't know, maybe 30 feet high. But it was a real test of stamina. And there was one player in particular who, aside from the physical demands of this, he was afraid of heights, and he was terrified of having to do this. And he finally overcame that. But it was, for him in particular, it was just this really challenging idea to shinny up this rope. So anyway, the baseline is that Harder was just this incredibly demanding figure. A little bit about the predominant player of that era. I'd be curious to know if any of you do you remember Ronnie Lee? He was the, I mean, without question, the leading light as a player. He was from, they had recruited him from Boston, and he was. I'm still not sure to this day how Oregon managed to get him out of Boston and come 3,000 miles west. They obviously put in a lot of hard work, but he was just really well built, 6'4", maybe 195 or 200 pounds. He was the kind of guy you'd look at him and say, gee, he'd be a great strong safety in football, something like that, or other positions in football as well, I suppose. But just an unbelievably magnetic figure in Eugene, deeply loved. He was not a great shooter, but he was the kind of guy. Nowadays they say he's not a great shooter, but he's a scorer. And Lee was that way. He averaged 18 points a game every year he was at Oregon. He was remarkably consistent. But a lot of his points came from, driving to the basket and just, pulling the ball back and then sort of almost willing the ball into the basket. He had a great game in particular when he was a freshman at Oregon. The first time Oregon hosted UCLA during his 4 years, he had 31 points, and in researching the register guard story, it referred to him taking the ball at Bill Walton, the UCLA All-American, 3-time All-American, and so you had this towering physical presence inside with Walton, and Lee was not intimidated at all. Took the ball to the basket against him and had this, might have been the most remarkable game he had in his 4 years, frankly. And then he was just the kind of player that, kids loved, and he seemed to love kids too, little kids, that would collect around him, and he'd play games with them, and just was this really incredibly magnetic figure in Eugene. And without question, he's, if you think of, I tried to toy with this a little bit in the book, and not very well, I don't think. But if you somehow were to come up with a number of the best athletes that the University of Oregon has ever produced, including people like Marcus Mariota, the Heisman Trophy winner, Lee would have to be among that group of 4 or 5. He was just a huge figure, especially locally and in the state. Again, we're talking about an era that's now 45, 50 years old, or almost 50, and obviously no social media at that time. But he was just a huge figure in that era. And also, I should mention, he's still the Oregon career leading scorer, 2,085 points. And it's interesting to me that he, if you take all the Pac-12 schools currently, his record, he would have set that record in his senior year of 1976. And if you took all the other 11 schools in the Pac-12, none of their career leading scorers go back even within a decade of his. And the part of the reason I bring that up is there was no 3-point shot back in the day that Lee competed, and so most of the other 11 schools, in fact, all of the other 11 would have come in the era of the 3-point shot, which of course makes a huge difference in that calculation. So um, as much as there was this love for Ronnie Lee, there was this incredible mania in Eugene over the Kamikaze Kids. It was a period of time when football really struggled, and I know that so well because in addition to covering Oregon State basketball, I was the beat writer on U of O football. Yeah, and they were really lean years in football with usually 2 or 3 wins. But basketball sort of became this incredible event in Eugene. And about Harder's second year, they began to sell out MacArthur Court, and they sold out, I believe, I want to say through the end of his tenure, which would have been in 1978. But if not, then most of those years they were selling out, and it was a really tough ticket, so to speak. And it became one of those things where you would see divorce settlements. The guy or the lady would get the rights to the season tickets, or in wills, people would, somebody dies and they would leave their tickets to somebody in the family. It became a big deal to get your hands on Oregon season tickets. And I suppose season tickets then probably were a ridiculously low amount by today's standards. I mean, they're probably $70 or $80 for a season ticket. But they were, there was just this incredible thirst for information about the program within Eugene. And before, nowadays you may have heard about how students will camp out at like Duke University to for days before a big game. Well, there were actually students who camped out outside the doors of MacArthur Court on University Street. A handful of students, would camp out a day or two before big games there, and it was just a huge happening in Eugene. One of the things I get into in the book is that Harder's personality was I think really intriguing. It would be interesting to know what a psychologist would come up with in regards to him, because he had really high standards for his players. He wanted to recruit good kids, quote unquote good kids. He had a dress code on when they went on road trips. I hesitate to say coat and ties, but I believe it was at least coats. I don't know about ties. But he definitely he had this high standard for his players, and yet in his personal life, I get into it just because it was such a big part of his persona. He was quite a womanizer, and it sort of tore apart his family. And it was an odd thing because Eugene was basically a medium-sized city. It was a city of about 75,000 at the time, and now it's about twice that size. Not that it would make any difference, but and as well, there were these other incidents that sort of you just sort of were left scratching your head. How did this guy possibly do some of this stuff? As an example, and I got into this pretty heavily, there was an infamous incident in 1974 in Corvallis at Gill Coliseum, where way back in the day, they used to have a trophy that exemplified or was emblematic of whichever school won the season series. And Oregon State was about to wrap it up in 1974 with a victory at Gill Coliseum against Oregon. And so there was a cheerleader, a male cheerleader, who was given the, right before the game wrapped up, there were seconds left on the clock. He decided that, the fans ought to be able to see this trophy. It was called the Chancellor's Cup. And, it was a basic trophy with a ball on the top. And so I believe it was like I go into it in great detail in the book. It was like 14 seconds left in the game, and it was a dead ball situation. And he starts out and runs around the perimeter of the floor, waving the trophy to the fans, who are naturally jacked up. They're about to beat Oregon. And he runs in front of the Oregon bench, and Harder sticks out his leg and trips him. And it was just so Dick Harder to do that. And of course the kid goes flying, totally shocked. And the trophy, the trophy goes up and lands, and the ball breaks off the trophy. So, and there's a big dent in the ball of the trophy. And of course it got sort of nasty inside Gill Coliseum right then. And Ralph Miller took the public address microphone and basically told people to try to cool it. And it was I was there that night, and it was vaguely, it seemed pretty ominous. Something could really, like a brawl or something could really break out. And when that happens, you might have fans involved, because, people saw this. And so that's probably the most outrageous thing Harder did in terms of a single incident. But there were a lot of other things that were just sort of mind-bending that I get into in the book. A couple of players that I interviewed for the book, and I interviewed quite a few, we chatted about whether an era like that would be possible today with social media and Twitter and Instagram and who knows what else, things that I'm unfamiliar with, that I can't operate. But and one or two of them said, they didn't think it would be possible. There was such a huge intensity and focus in Eugene on this program, and as I said, like a thirst for knowledge, that it was, it would be hard to envision. I think Harder would have been one of those coaches, and you hear about him today, I think it's fairly common actually, that would have banned his players from Twitter, at least during the season, because there was just the intensity of the back and forth. If they were active on Twitter, it would, there would be so many people in Eugene who would be just wanting to know everything that was going on. There was just the program just ran at such a fever pitch, and so it would be really interesting to see how that would have worked out. I can talk for a couple minutes about self-publishing if you'd like. I don't know if you have time or interest, but I could just kind of give you the basics of my experiences with it. I've done 5 books now, and the first 3 that I did were with publishers, where a publisher approached me and asked if I could do a book on a particular topic, and if I could get it done by a certain time, et cetera, and I did that in those 3 cases. When you work with a publisher, essentially, I wouldn't say this is entirely true, but essentially you just write the book and they do the rest of the work. They get the photos, they do the cover, they primarily do the marketing and the promotion and so forth, although they might prevail upon you to, to help market the thing, which, is not a big deal, because if you want to sell books, you got to help market the thing. So, so the big difference in self-publishing is as the name would imply, you're taking on a lot of these tasks yourself, or sort of subcontracting them out, I guess you'd say. It's funny, when I think in years past, when I heard about self-publishing, I sort of had this image of sitting down with and creating this huge Word file and writing the book and like printing it out on my HP printer and then slapping a title page on it, and here's the book. And well, I had this sort of real slapdash image of it in my mind, but it's not like that at all. And hopefully, if you see this book, hopefully you would not know that it's self-published as opposed to working with a publisher. Just in brief, and I won't go into a lot of detail because we probably don't have that time, but a guy that had done this and was kind of a mentor to me told me, he said, really you need two things. He said, write a great book and get a great cover. And so to get the cover, what you've got to do is hook up with a graphic design person. And you can, there's even, I explored it sort of briefly for this book, but you can, there's actually websites that have examples of book covers that they design. And again, I've never worked with them, but apparently it's a way to go. The other big difference in self-publishing as opposed to working with a publisher is there is, much as I just referred to, the idea of printing this stuff out on your home printer or whatever. Well, that's not what you do. You have to, for instance, this book is available on Amazon, and you can't just say send Word files to Amazon and say, hey, here's the book, print it, do print out copies for me or anything like that. What you have to do, there's sort of a middleman, so to speak. It's what is a preprint service. And what that does is, okay, so I write the book, and then I send it electronically to this preprint service. The fellow I worked with he's down in South Texas. Never met him, but he's done a great job, and he was recommended to me. And what he does is basically format the thing so that it is in the shape that it needs to be for Amazon to take it and convert it into book form. And it's not just Amazon, but there's another major wholesaler, I guess you'd say. It's called Ingram, and Ingram services brick and mortar stores like Barnes and Noble and your neighborhood local bookstore that you might go to. So again, that function is basically sort of coding what you wrote and fitting it into a page size and other things that are necessary for that wholesaler or for Amazon to produce an actual living, breathing, so to speak, book. So anyway, that's about all I have. Again, the book is available on Amazon.com if you're interested, or you can order it. Or perhaps it's even in a bookstore if you down there if you're interested. And the other thing I want to mention, the subject always comes up. I'd love to get a signed copy or whatever, and obviously I'm more than willing to do that. But the problem is, you get the book, you have to send it to me, I have to sign it. I have to send it back, and we're both incurring mailing costs and so forth. So anyway, to get around this, my wife designed this pretty cool. These are labels. They're all the same. I don't know if you can see them well or not. They're about 4 by 4 inches. And the photograph is on the floor here is Ronnie Lee, the player that I talked about. And so what we're doing is for $5, if you're interested, if you're going to buy a book or give it as a gift or whatever, you can just email me, and I'll give you my email address, and you can probably also get it from Tim. Just email me, and I could sign it here or personalize it to if you're giving it as a gift to somebody, and then I'll send this label off to you, and you just slap it inside on one of the front pages, and then when you get it, send me $5 back, and it's really a pretty cool workaround to the issue of signing books, which as I say can be a hassle on both ends. So I'll give you my email addresses if anybody is interested. It's Casa Budman, CASABUDMAN @gmail.com. So again, if you are interested, just shoot me an email, and I can get these out pretty quickly, and hopefully if you're interested in a gift giving or whatever. The book is $18.99, and it's been well received, and I really had a blast putting it together. So anyway, I don't know if there's time for questions, but I've got as much time as you might need. So if anybody has any, fire away.
I have a question. Trying to remember, 71, I was in college and had young kids too, that probably would not have been considered abusive behavior in art, but it sounds like, given today's standards, that he might have been somewhat abusive to those kids. Or does it just sound that way?
Well, it's a blurry line, frankly. I mean, just as Bob Knight at Indiana was, I mean, ultimately I think that's what brought him down at Indiana, that he had, if you remember, there was a video that surfaced of him, kind of roughing up a player. Neil Reed was the player. I remember that.
You have the Woody Hayes incident in Ohio on football.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I played basketball earlier than that in high school for a very demanding coach. We had blue blazers, gray slacks, and school ties when we went on the road.
Yeah, everybody did.
And we did, if we had a bad practice, we spent a long time running backwards from one end of the court to the other, but we never had anything of that nature. And I do, it's interesting. There's stories here in Gold Beach about how in the past coaches treated their students and their players, but it is what it is back then. And I joined my wife with being surprised that there wasn't pushback, but maybe his escapades in his private life out of the court, off the court, you know, these took away from anyone getting on his back about how he treated his players. But I don't think in 1961 our high school would have tolerated our coach going further than he went with us.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, I go back to what I said a minute ago about you've got some real blurred lines there. I mean, he had, you know, I attended a handful of his practices, you know, not many certainly, and not to say that I ever saw the most brutal of practice either. I mean, not all practices are equally demanding, but you know, you get into that question of what can you do. I mean, I don't think he was ever accused of, like, you know, physically striking a player, at least, you know, I know he was never accused of that. Now, you can also argue that making guys slam into each other, diving for a loose ball is no different from striking a player. I mean, you could argue that. But yeah, it was a different era, and you know, there's no question you could get away with things then that you couldn't get away with now. But yet even now, you know, you'll have coaches that might cross a line. I mean, even a few years ago, Mike Montgomery, you know, who's a, you know, really well-respected coach. I don't know if you remember, but gosh, this was probably 8 or 10 years ago, got in some hot water for you know, grabbing a player in the huddle and maybe grabbing him by his shirt or whatever, jersey, and yanking him toward him. And you know, I don't remember whether he had to apologize, you know, issue a formal apology. It seemed like he did offer something like that, but it was a different time, and there's no question coaches could get away with more. And part of it was there weren't as many eyes on things. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone now, and so everybody has a camera, and it was just different.
So what did Harder do after leaving the U of O? Was that the height of his career, or?
You know, he went he went to Penn State. He had come. I didn't really background that too well. He had come from the University of Pennsylvania. He was a Philadelphia guy originally. Came to Oregon, and then he just sort of had tapped out at Oregon, I think. And so he in 1978 he goes back to Penn State. And you know, Penn State at the time was, I mean, then and now is a football school, and Joe Paterno was the head coach at Penn State. And he struggled back there, never really got it going. And then in 1983, he went to the NBA as an assistant coach, and he had a long, very long, I believe, 26-year career in the NBA. In fact, he was a head coach briefly for the Charlotte Hornets when they were starting out as an expansion team. But he took on a persona as he stayed in the NBA for years and years. He took on a persona of very, very respected, and he lost a lot of the rough edges that he had at Oregon.
Do you remember which of the big five he was with in Philadelphia?
He was with Penn.
With the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And he had two tremendously successful years in 69-70 and 70-71. In fact, his 70-71 team went undefeated in the regular season and was undefeated all the way to the the round of 8 in the NCAA tournament and got beat by Villanova, ironically, right there, in just a horrendous game where Villanova just crushed them, and they hadn't lost a game all year. But he had 2 unbelievable seasons at Penn. Anybody else?
Well, thank you. That was very interesting.
I
Yes.
do have a question more about working in the newspaper industry and what you've seen with the newspaper industry over the last few years. I mean, I'm a library director, so it's interesting to watch. We just, in the middle of COVID, we realized that the Register Guard had transitioned to USA Today ownership, and we had a subscription, and we were just looking at the content in it, and 90% of it was syndicated content. About 10% of it was actually local news, and I mean, we just dumped the subscription. I'm just kind of curious about even just limiting it to the sports field. What's happening with newspapers and how that's impacting reporting.
Well, it's brutal, frankly, and the Register Guard is a great example of it. It obviously, the industry itself is. I mean, there are a lot fewer papers now than there were, pick a year, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But the Register Guard is a great example of, frankly, how things have gone downhill. There were circulation when I was there, or toward the end of when I was there, was like 75,000 or close to 80,000, and it's down now under 30,000, and for good reason. It was a locally owned paper with a really well-respected publisher, family-owned paper, and the publisher really cared about the product. And at some point, the family sold the paper. I don't know. I was gone by then. I don't know when that happened, but it started a chain of events where, as you say, it's now a Gannett paper, and the formula for Gannett papers is strip it down to the bone, and I guess they must make a slight amount of money. Somebody, at the paper, in fact, or somebody who was recently at the paper told me last week that if you're Gannett and you've got enough of these, you can, it's worthwhile to you. If you, in fact, the way he put it is, if you have 177 papers and you're making a little bit on all of them, then you're okay. But to give you an idea, there was a time like when the Register Guard sports staff had 10 full-time people. Well, now they have it's either 2 or 3, and the deadlines are ridiculous. I guess they're allowed, like, I mean, normally, back in the day, copy deadlines, like if you've got a 7:30 or 8 o'clock basketball game, there's no way you can get a story in until, between 10 and 11 o'clock. Nowadays, I guess the way it works is they're allowed like one story that can be turned in, like, after like 6 p.m. or something like that. So it's terribly crippling to the product, and I can see why readers would be turning away from it. I mean, it's a mess. And there's, on a broader scale, there's a lot of talk about whether the government should bail out the newspaper industry, because there is I'm sure there's a lot of people that would laugh at that idea or find it really repugnant. But there's if journalism is done right, it's it's a huge service to the community, and we're all poorer without it if we don't have quality journalism.
Well, the Oregonian's not what it used to be.
No, not anywhere near.
And local television stations are going the same way. They're being bought up, and the FCC allowed big companies to have, I think, twice as many licensed stations as they used to be limited to. And what we get here on our cable, I think 2 or 3 out of the 4 locals are owned by the same organization that sends out scripted stories they have to read on their evening news for us.
Wow.
So it's not good, but it's happening through all the media that is there to inform us, not just
Yeah.
newspapers.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I hesitate to call it an exception, but it's close to that. The Seattle Times, which is my old paper, my last paper, I was there 16 years. They've held out and done a really remarkable job. It's been family owned for like 5 generations now, and even though the product as a whole is not as good as it was 15, 20, 30 years ago, it's still pretty vibrant. And they won a Pulitzer Prize. They won like 10 overall, but they won one here within the last couple of years. And I give the family a lot of credit, because I know they're not making much money, if any, but they're hanging in there and still putting on a product that's at least respectable. It's not the space in the paper, the number of pages is certainly diminished and whatnot, and that's a sign of the times. But
I agree with, I mean, I don't know that I would advocate having the government take over newspapers or subsidize them even, for sure. But I do know that in Gold Beach, the newspaper, like if you were an entity like the school, say, or the library, the newspaper was traditionally an important arm of what we did, as far as making sure that people understood what we were doing. And now, like, I've basically got a full-time staff person doing that work, and it's still an uphill climb to get the word out about what we're doing.
yeah. Well, when you think of a city of any size, not to have a vibrant watchdog on things that are going on, like with city government or county government or the police department or whatever. I mean, not to have some sort of oversight is really is not a great trend.
Well, when the family that bought the Pilot in Brookings, adding it to their list of community papers, they did a survey, and I believe more people wanted Dear Abby and cartoons than wanted local news. So, we get what we ask for, or at least we get what the lowest common denominator of our county asks for. And it is sad. There is maybe, you have a reporter at your school board meetings occasionally,
Right.
but I know Linda Pinkham is on Zoom with the school committee, at least. And I think if we get your school board things up fast enough, she listens to them and tries to do local news, but it is very, very difficult. There's just not a market for it. There's nothing left in the paper, and the price went up and the number of pages went down.
Yeah.
I stopped buying it. I have a hard time burning the trash because I don't have any newspaper to use to start the fires. They're not worth buying.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring this to closure here. Bud, thank you so much.
Yes, Bud. Thank you.
It was a very great topic, good questions, and I'll make sure that our membership gets the links and makes another plug for your book, Mad
Cool.
Hoops, on Amazon, and think about it when it's holiday time. Oh, it's holiday time. All right. Well, everyone else, have a great week. We'll see you next time. And Bud, I really do appreciate your time and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Bud.
Yeah, thank you to Tim and thanks to the rest of you. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care.